Today we will be talking about how to write the methodology chapter. Out of your 5 chapters, this is chapter number 3. So far, we have written or we have learned how to write the introduction chapter and the literature review chapter. We'll go through some slides and then we'll go through also the methodology chapter of one of the theses. I will be sharing with you, analyzing the methodology chapter of that thesis, sharing with you what are the good things I would suggest in that thesis and what are the not so good things that I would not recommend for you to do. That's how we will go through this session. Now, what is this methodology chapter about? What do you do here? Basically, this is the chapter where you tell us how you will do the empirical study. And it has the following subsections. 1, the research approach. We'll go through these one by one in detail. 2, research context. 3, data collection. 4, data analysis. And finally, the verification of results. So ideally, in the master thesis, when I read your methodology chapter, I would look forward to see these 5 sections. This is not a very long chapter. So imagining that your thesis is 70, 80 pages, including the cover page and the references, this chapter should be around 8 to 10 pages. So not a very long chapter. Research approach. We have been talking a bit about the approach. We have been thinking about basically 2 types of approaches, qualitative approach or quantitative approach, right? We discussed about this. So here you will be telling us about what is your approach. Are you taking a qualitative approach or quantitative approach? And sometimes when you know under qualitative approach, there can be some research methods, like for example, case study method. If you know under qualitative approach, if you will pursue a certain type of research method, that should also be presented here. It's not only presenting, but it's also justifying, telling us why you think the approach you choose suits for your research. That is a very important thing to remember, especially if you are targeting a high grade. You need to tell us why your selected approach is the most suitable to answer your research questions. Here in this chapter, we are also looking to see literatures, so citations. You will be reading about methodology literatures. In the second chapter, called Literature Review, you had a lot of citations about the topics that you were researching. But here, in most of the theses, we will see similar citations. So these will be methodology literature citations. So if you choose qualitative approach, if you choose the case study method, then the so-called father of case study method, it's Robert Yin. So I would be expecting to see citations from Robert Yin and also other scholars as well, who have been telling us about how to do the case study method, why case study method is suitable to certain, it's not suitable for everything. In which contexts it will be suitable. So when you are justifying your choice, telling us why it is suitable to answer your research questions, I also expect to see support from relevant citations from the literature. So that is justification. Not that you only justify with your own thoughts. That's not the idea. You need to support your thoughts with the relevant citations. And of course, the literature also tells us how the selected approach should be applied in a correct manner. So you will be also writing here about, okay, what you should take care of when you are applying your selected research approach, research method. Sometimes some students are eager to discuss about, for example, philosophies. Or when we talk about approaches, when you read the literature, you may also see deductive versus inductive. I don't know, have you gone through these in your research methods course or qualitative? No? You haven't heard about, are you also taking qualitative research methods?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So deductive, inductive, have you heard these concepts? Okay. You heard it, Libin.
Yeah, I think you have one ready theory and you prove or test it.
Very good.
It's true.
Very good.
The inductive is you use your data,
Right.
inductive data to.
Right. So the reason why we do research is to get better understanding of what happens in practice with theoretical concepts. So to progress the theory, we can either test existing theories or we can develop new theories from the practice, from empirical data that we collect. So by observing what's happening in the world, we can conceptualize new theories. So the first one, testing existing theories, that's the deductive approach. And the second one, developing new theories from what we observe in the world, not from earlier theories, is the inductive approach. Well, you will not be worrying in your thesis about neither of those because your aim is not to test any theory. Your aim is not to develop any theory. These are things that you would be, if it happens to be, doing at doctoral level studies. You know, that's the idea at doctoral level studies or further would be to develop. Remember, we were talking about two worlds, the practical world and the theoretical world. So you would be trying to develop the theoretical world at the doctoral level. And that's when you would be worrying more about deductive and inductive approaches. At this stage, at the master's level, I suggest, you know, don't get into any philosophies, don't get into deductive versus inductive discussions in this section under the research approach. Second section called research context. So this is the section that.
So here the research approach, you need to see that here, the first part it is only qualitative or.
That's the main, you know, distinction. So if you know under qualitative that, for example, you will do case study method, that should also be explained. But basically, qualitative versus quantitative, that's what is meant by the research approach. Research context. So this is the section that you will present about the context of your empirical study. So if you are going to do a case study, so for example, Sari may be doing, she has a case company that she wants to do the research. So this is where she will introduce the company. So that's the research context. Tariq, who's not here with us today, he will be doing his research about the textile industry in Bangladesh. So this is the place where he will introduce, in general, the textile industry in Bangladesh. This is not the place that you start to do your research, but this is just basic descriptive explanation of the context, the company. So when we say, okay, introduce the company here, you know, what's the business that the company is in? Hi. So what's the business that the company is in? What is its turnover? Who are the competitors of the company? What kind of, where is the company located? So a bit about the location, a bit about the business in general, a bit about the company's mission, vision, what the company is doing, who the company is competing with, so that we have some understanding of where the research will take place.
Okay, so I'm like writing only about the company, not anything pretty much like about the Finnish retail industry. Or
So-
just like mention it really quickly.
So that you would also perhaps integrate. So if we said that competitors and the industry that the company is in, you may also want to integrate about the Finnish retail industry in brief. So we have 5 sections here, and we said 8 to 10 pages. So that means that about per section, we are going to write about 2 pages. So don't go into, you can write a 20-page report about Finnish retail industry. So that's not what we are after. That's not what we are after, right? Okay. The third one, that's going to be data collection. Now, empirical study, what you will be doing, basically, you will be collecting data and analyzing it. That will help you to answer your main research questions. In this section, you are going to tell us how you collected the data. So when we talk about data, there are 2 types of data: primary data, secondary data. So you will be starting by collecting secondary data. Secondary data is good if it helps our purposes. Usually, it's not always that you will find secondary data. Secondary data means data that is already available, that you don't need to go and collect. But the problem there is that usually there is not secondary data that will really serve your purposes fully. Well, in some cases, there may be. The good side is that it's already available, so it saves you energy. So my suggestion is that always look for the secondary data first, what is already available, and then go to collect the primary data. When we're talking about qualitative approach, primary data can mean, and usually is, interviews. So you will be going and doing interviews. Now here, when you are describing, you should describe the following. How many interviews did you do? With whom did you interview? What was the language of the interviews? How long the interviews took place? And what are the things that you took care of when you did the interview? So you need to also tell us how you chose the interviewees. That's also a very important choice which needs to be justified. The interviewees should be the right people to offer you the answers to your questions. So that is the main justification. Make sure that you choose the right people to help you answer your questions. So here you just describe all those things that you did or will do in order to answer your questions when you are collecting the data. If we are talking about a quantitative approach, is there anybody here who will pursue a quantitative approach? Ted, I think you were thinking that you need the quantitative, but you are not so eager. Do I remember right?
Because I have the data. I was thinking of doing a qualitative, but then I have the data, which means
Oh, you have the data,
all plans and all this stuff,
the quantitative data.
the numbers,
Yeah, you have?
supposedly.
Okay, we'll see. So basically, when you are doing a quantitative approach, you will be doing the survey. The survey will be your method to collect data. And in doing that, there are things that you need to pay attention. How will you choose the sample? So there is the population, but then you need to choose a sample to collect the data. So if you are doing a study about understanding the impacts of gender, impacts of, let's say, age, income level on something, make sure that in your sample you have enough number of males and females. So don't have all the males in your sample and no females, then you cannot say anything about the impact of gender. Make sure that you have people in your sample from all income levels. So if you do the survey with students only, oh, it's easy. There are lots of students here. Let me just have the survey with them. You'll have all your sample will be of a certain category of income level. So then you cannot say the impact of income level on something. So make sure that your sample has representatives from all the relevant groups that you are intending to test. So the quantitative approach is more for testing some things. And in that respect, the choice of the sample is important. And of course, when you are doing the interviews, you need to get permission from the interviewees whether you can put their names on your thesis. From ethical purposes, that's important. They can say, oh, no, don't write my name. Okay. Then you just mention, you don't mention anything that will reveal who that person is. Sometimes they may say, oh, don't even write my company. And then you can say, okay, I interviewed a manager, or, you don't need to say what manager he is, a manager from a company in Finnish retail industry. You just mention it that way. Then important thing is when you do the interview, you will afterwards transcribe the interview for the analysis, data analysis. So it's not that you take notes, don't trust your memory. So that's not a reliable way to collect data. Ask permission. Can I record the interview? So you need to mention here that you ask permission for putting the name, you ask permission for recording the interview. So these are things that you need to write in the data collection section. Okay? Describe thoroughly the process, what you did or what you will do. Okay? This is the chapter for that. You are not going to share any results, but you are going to share here how you will collect the data or how you collected the data. What is the sample size? How many people you interviewed? What was the language of the interviews? And remember, all the choices that you make need to be justified. Tell us why. If Libin makes the interviews in Chinese language, why in Chinese language? Well, it's very natural that you need to do the interviews in the language that both the interviewee and you understand the best. And remember, in the thesis, we are not interested in the responses from the interviewees, but we are interested to see your interview questions. So put your interview questions into the appendix. Appendix 1, Appendix 2, whatever it is, in the order, should be your list of interview questions. Now, I will be telling it also next week, but I think it's good to tell it many times as the opportunity comes. When you are designing your interview questions, or when you are designing your survey questions, your biggest help will be your what? How will you design your interview questions? This is also one thing that you need to describe here under data collection. So if you are going to do an interview, the first thing you need to do is that you need to prepare your interview questions. You need to decide also, are you going to do a structured interview, semi-structured interview, or an unstructured interview? Usually, semi-structured interview, meaning you have some structure in the beginning, but you are also flexible during the interview. There may come up new ideas, and you may want to ask further questions which were not in your original list. So that's semi-structured. Unstructured would be you have no questions and you just go and talk freely. And structured would be you have your questions and you just ask those questions, nothing more, nothing less. So how do you prepare your interview questions? This is a really important question. If you remember our session about the literature review, we ended up with a theoretical framework, right? The purpose of the literature review was to find a theoretical framework which you will use in your empirical study. And we said that it's your map to find the answers to your research questions. So here it comes. You will use your theoretical framework in designing your interview or survey questions. So there should be this strong link between the literature review and the empirical study, and the strong link is the use of the theoretical framework in designing your interview or survey questions. Is this clear? Did you remember it after I said it?
Use the framework.
The framework, theoretical framework. That's important. That's what you will use here. And that you should also explain when you start data collection. One of the important things of data collection is the questions that you design for your interview or the survey. How did you design it? That should be explained under data collection. Next is data analysis. How did you analyze the data? That should be explained in detail under this section. And we will go into how to analyze data in a quantitative and a qualitative study separately next week. How do we analyze the data? That will be explained next week. I don't maybe go into that. The questions that you see here, especially the second and the third questions, maybe they are more for quantitative studies. So when you are doing a quantitative study, you should tell us, okay, what are the variables? What is the dependent variable? What are the independent variables that you use in your quantitative study? How you measure those variables? What are the units of measurement? So those need to be explained under data analysis for quantitative studies. So if you are doing a qualitative study, perhaps variables and their measurement is not the focus here. And the process, what, are you going to use a software for the analysis? Yes, you will be using something, you know. For qualitative research methods, have you learned about how to analyze qualitative data? Will you learn?
No, because we don't have that course anymore.
The course is over and you
Yeah,
haven't.
that's what- We need to do the assignment, the final assignment, where we need to write what kind of data analysis tool we're using. So that's why it
So
would
what
be
did-
helpful to tell us.
What did you learn in the? Yeah, I understand that you will write the.
We learned that part, right? Like how do you analyze a
Yeah, I
particular,
wasn't there then.
how to analyze a particular text?
Yeah.
So first you need to collect the data and smaller things.
Content analysis,
Content analysis.
coding.
Exactly.
Have you heard about coding, content analysis?
Content analysis. One.
Right. So usually coding is the technique that you use when you are analyzing, let's say you have you have made your interview, you have transcribed it, you have the text on paper, okay? Already you use the Word document for this, right? Now, how you are going to analyze this data? That's what we are going to cover next week, okay? I don't go into that, but here you need to describe the process, starting from the transcribed data that we have on paper, and then from this, you make the analysis to come up with answers to your research questions. How you do the whole analysis, that will be described under this data analysis. You are not going to do the analysis here. You will describe how you will do the analysis, okay? And we'll talk about that next week. Now, the last part under the methodology chapter, that's going to be the verification of findings. Now, there's the saying by Silverman here, and David Silverman, you can check out his book, is a good reference for qualitative research, how to do qualitative research, so you may benefit from, his other sayings. Unless you can show your audience that the procedures you used to ensure that your methods were reliable and your conclusions valid, there is little point in aiming to conclude a research dissertation. So here we are talking about reliability and validity, okay? So what do we mean by reliability? What do we mean by validity? So how do we make sure that, you really found the answers to your questions? So I don't know, have you talked about reliability, validity in your research methods courses? So what we are trying to do, I don't know, is this going to show the right place? What we are trying to do is we are shooting at this dart table, not dart board. So 12 points, 10 points, 8, 6, looks more like a dot, 4, 2, and 0. Tarek, are you a good shooter?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? How about Priyanka? Okay. So now our goal is to find the answers to our questions, right? And the answers are here. So let's make it visible where the answers are.
Bullseye.
Just that. Hit the bullseye.
Direction.
So now I am going to give you an example of somebody who is very reliable. So you need to be reliable and valid. Now this guy is shooting like this. These are where he's sitting. Guy is very reliable, all the time. That's reliable. But this is not valid, because his radar, the glasses he's wearing are not the right glasses. His hand is quite good, but he doesn't see the right place. So this is reliable, but not valid. Okay? Now, how would the other guy look who is valid but not reliable? Well, that looks like this. So now the valid guy is coming, but he's not reliable. So he sees the target, but he's not, so this is the valid, but not reliable. Okay? What we want is both reliable and valid, and that will be like this. So this is reliable and valid. So we want to ensure that we achieve reliability and validity. That will help us to answer the research questions that we had correctly. We want to make sure that our answers are correct. So to do that, during the empirical study, we need to take care of some things that will help us to achieve reliability and validity. And under this section called verification of findings, we are supposed to write about how we achieve reliability and validity of our findings. And in doing that, we talk about a couple of things. First thing is in validity, there are two types of validity. First one is internal validity, and the other one is external validity. Internal validity is about the relationship between our questions and our answers. So how do you make sure that the answers are matching the questions? Well, here, the most important thing is that we have the link. We have a theoretical framework which has been developed by reviewing literatures that are relevant to our research questions. So we reviewed topics that are relevant to the research questions and came up with a theoretical framework, our so-called map, and that we used in our empirical study. So that is a very important thing to mention under internal validity that you hopefully will do to ensure internal validity. External validity, now this is about generalizability of your findings to generalize. So let's say you make a case study about a company in the Finnish retail sector. Can you generalize your findings from that case company to all the industry in Finland, to all industries in the world? Now, if you are doing qualitative research, mostly you are aiming to explore some phenomena. Your aim is not going to be to generalize. And here, under external validity, you should be telling this very openly and clearly. Those of you who are going to do qualitative research, that your aim is not to generalize, but to explore. Case studies especially have been criticized about their potential for generalization, and scholars have agreed that that's not the purpose why we are doing qualitative research. We want to gain deep insights, we want to understand a phenomenon in detail. That's why we do qualitative research. We are not interested in generalizing. You will read these comments when you read the methodology literature, and that's what you should be writing. If you are doing a quantitative research, well, in that case, you are actually from a sample aiming to generalize some things for the whole population. In that case, this part about external validity, you need to say about, okay, why do you think that your findings can be generalized from the sample to the population? Well, there you will tell us that, okay, you covered all the, what kind of sampling strategy you followed and how you covered all the representatives of your key variables in the sample. So those are things that you need to be, external validity is more relevant and you should be more worrying if you are doing a quantitative approach. Reliability, the reliable guy over there. How do you make sure that you always hit the same spot? Now, if you think from the research perspective, so you are doing a qualitative approach and you go to do your interview. Now, if you don't record the interview and you just trust your brain, you take some notes, that's not a reliable approach. You will probably not remember everything what the interviewee has been telling you. That's why we suggest that you record the interviews and then you transcribe them and you have the full text and you start analyzing that full text. That will ensure reliability. Sources, so secondary data. You will be using some secondary data. You have not been the person to collect that data. How can you trust that the data you will use, the secondary data, is reliable? So the suggestion here is that you should be using data, secondary data from reliable sources. How reliable is the source? And even if we think about even the most reliable sources, so you find some nice data from Statistics Finland, from OECD, World Bank, so-called reliable sources, I can assure you that there can always be some mistakes. So one method we utilize for achieving reliability is so-called data triangulation. So when you are using data from a secondary source, look also similar data from other sources. Sometimes there can be some weird mistakes. So if, let's say, you are comparing the GDP, gross domestic product per capita figures of companies, of countries, you take the data from World Bank and you take the data from OECD, you may be seeing some differences in the data. Okay, there may be some small differences concerning, for example, the use of exchange rates. So if all the data is in US dollars, of course, they are converted from local currencies to the US dollar. They may have used some different currencies. So there can be some small differences, but then that's not very important. More important is if you see really some weirdness. If you see that the GDP per capita of Bangladesh is more than that of Finland, then the question should arise in your mind that there is something wrong with the source, the data of the source that I am using. So you need to be very careful with the sources, with the data. Don't take them as granted, that they are all correct. So data triangulation is one method you may use to increase the reliability of your work. We have also this objectivity, and qualitative research especially is always subject to subjectivity. So at the end, you are analyzing the data, and in doing the analysis, so let's say we have the same data, okay? Ted, you have this and I have this. And you analyze this and I analyze this. I bet that we will come up not with exactly the same results. There will be some differences. And of course, you know, I have my own glasses, you have your lenses. So we have different perspectives, our subjective insights, which unknowingly, unconsciously get into the picture when we are analyzing the data. Although we have the same data, we may come up with different interpretations, different results. So how objective have you been in your analysis? So when you will use the coding, one way to achieve objectivity, when you are using coding, those codes will come from your theoretical framework. So here, also in the analysis, your theoretical framework, again, comes to play an important role. Your codes that you use in the analysis coming from the theoretical framework, if we use the same codes, that will minimize the subjectivity level. So here you tell about the level of objectivity, the level of subjectivity that is inherent in your study. Qualitative research is more vulnerable to some subjectivity. That's, you know, inevitable. While in quantitative research, objectivity can be achieved to a higher degree because at the end you will be using a certain statistics package, and independent of who is using the package, the answers you get will be the same. Finally, I want to draw your attention to our Bible, our assessment criteria. And here we have the following criteria that are related to your methodology chapter. So these are the criteria that will be assessed when we read your methodology chapter. Description of the research methods. So how you describe them is important. How you describe the methods. I jump to the third one. Collection and description of development research data. So how you describe the data collection, that is important. And here there are two things. It's the description. So here there are two parts. It's the description, but also the use. So we also have the description of the research method, but then there is also the use of the research method. So we are looking at two things. How you describe the method, research approach, how you use the approach. So that is the implementation part. So you may describe like, okay, you know, according to the book, but then in the actual use, we may see that, okay, you know, it's not exactly how it has been described. So we assess both the description and also the actual use. And similarly, we also look at the analysis of the research data and its description. So data analysis, how you describe the analysis, is also assessed under this part. That's the methodology chapter, 8 to 10 pages. How long are your methodology chapters going to be for the qualitative research methods course? 2,000, 3,000 words. How much is that? Well, I think it's about, I don't think that it's, yeah, I think it's about 8, 10 pages. I don't think it's more than that. 2,000, 3,000 words. So that's the methodology chapter. Any questions? Well, in that case, let's go and check.
How we use the word, because I think we cannot use I in that thesis. We need to use author or
So how do we write the thesis? I, author, researcher. Oh, my suggestion is use I. My suggestion is that. You know, when you say the author, the researcher, important thing, sometimes I see students, important thing is be consistent. It can be that you use author or researcher, whatever, that, I mean, they are not wrong, but be consistent. Don't use I somewhere and then author somewhere and researcher some other place. You know, keep it the same in the whole thesis.
so I is a lot in young.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
That's easy.
Yes. In that case, I suggest that we have a look. So if you go in your, if you want to, you know, follow more easily from your devices than the screen, you can go to sample thesis, and under that, open the thesis by Nina Poronen. You remember this thesis, right? We have been already looking into the literature review chapter and the introduction chapter of this thesis. Now we will be looking at the methodology chapter. So the thesis is about enabling bioeconomy-related new business development in central Finland. And now when we look at the structure, this is usually how we start when we start assessing the thesis. Under that, what do I see? Research philosophy. Oh my God. Avoid. Don't get into philosophy. Research approach and case study. So she has used qualitative approach and case study. So, okay, that's the first part. Data collection and analysis. She has merged those two parts into one. Data collection, data analysis. They could be also separate parts. Verification of the results. Okay, nice. Now what we see here is that she has a separate chapter called research context. And the research context for this thesis is the bioeconomy of central Finland. And what we see here is that the reason why she has made it as a separate chapter, it's because it's so long, 13 pages, right? That's a long chapter. So you wouldn't want to integrate that into the methodology chapter. So if Sari wants to present, you know, a thorough view of the Finnish retail industry, and you know that thorough view is more than a couple of pages, it is one option that she may have a separate chapter for that, for the research context. But you know, you wouldn't need to go into that detail. So let's go into into the methodology chapter. Now, it starts with telling us what was the purpose of the research. So the chapter starts by reminding the reader the purpose of the research. This can be important because it tells us about when you are justifying your choices, the choices will need to be tied to your research questions. Sometimes you may remind the research questions here or the purpose. So that is that for that reason, it may be good to remind about the purpose. And here, she is also reminding us that she used the gap model as her theoretical framework in the empirical study. And she is also briefly telling about the research process, how the research process went. There is a brief introduction into that before we go into the research philosophy. Now, remember also my earlier one comment. Let's have a look at this 3.1. So we don't want to enter research philosophy. That was my comment. But another comment that I had earlier. So look at this. So it's 6 lines on this page, and then 4 lines, so 10 lines, 1 paragraph, not even half a page. Do not open a section if you are going to write only 1 paragraph. Be careful about opening sections. When you will open the section, make sure that it goes at least 1 page, and ideally 1.5 to 2 pages. Don't open a section for a paragraph only. Feel free to use bold if all you will say about that is only 1 paragraph. Okay? So now let's go into the research approach. Now, what is good here is she is explaining in the second paragraph that it was decided to take the qualitative approach. So she uses the qualitative approach. And she's justifying here why qualitative approach suits better for her purposes than quantitative approach. A case study may well be chosen because of the researcher's own personal interest and desire to understand what the phenomenon is all about. It's also claimed that qualitative research can well be used in research that aims at interpretation and understanding of the research phenomenon within a context. So there is some reasoning here with the use of citations. So here we see citations from Kovalainen and Eriksson, 2008, Simons, 2009. So these are also methodology literatures which you may find as useful for your thesis. So we see here some kind of justification why qualitative research and case study has been selected. And here we see again in further that case study was chosen as the research strategy. That this is an intensive case study research. And again, we see justification using Robert Yin, and there's also Myers here, uh, as literatures to support the choice of case study. And here we see further reasoning why case study has been chosen. So what we are doing here, we are telling about the research approach and basically why that suits to answer our research questions with the help of methodology literature. Now, perhaps what's missing here, according to what I have shared with you, okay, in pursuing case study, what are the important things to take into account in implementing case study methodology? So she doesn't go much into detail about that. She's only limited this section, which is all in all a bit more than 1 page, to justifying, telling us her choice, qualitative research, case study strategy, and then justifying why that suits her research questions better than, for example, quantitative research. Next, we look at data collection and analysis. We realize immediately that she is collecting data via semi-structured interviews. And then she is again telling us that semi-structured interviews are suitable with the aid of literature. Very good. Now, one thing here, when I say literature, what is missing here, according to the YAMC reporting instructions, immediately the use of IBID. There is Eriksson and Kovalainen, just above the same citation. So the second one should be with the use of IBID. Now we look into here, the persons interviewed were chosen from different organizations in the field of bioeconomy in Finland. So she is describing, okay, who were the interviewees. So semi-structured interviews. How data was collected via semi-structured interviews. Why semi-structured interviews? Justification. Who were the interviewees? Okay, we see that there were a total of 14 interviews between January and June 2014. And she has made a table of the interviewees in Appendix 2. So if we go to the appendices, let's go to look what she has in the appendices. Appendix 1, that's the interview questions. That should be in everyone's thesis who is doing a qualitative research via interviews. One appendix should be the interview questions. You may do the interviews in Chinese, in Hindu, whatever, Finnish, Bulgarian. Is it Bangladesh? What is the language you speak in Bangladesh?
Bangla.
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 In Bangla,
Not Bangla.
in India, what are the languages that you speak?
Hindi.
Hindi, not Hindu.
Sorry?
Not Hindu.
No.
No.
Hindi.
Is the religion.
Okay.
Hindu is the religion. Okay. Hindi is the language.
Hindi is the official language of the country.
Okay.
But again, every state has their own language. Yes. For
Oh,
example, I belong to a part where the language is Telugu.
Telugu.
Telugu. Is it very different, like?
Yes. Yes. The origin is same, but the language is different.
So basically you cannot understand each other. Or
You cannot understand each other. There are some words, but you cannot understand.
and basic language is English. and common language.
The common language, see, the national language is Hindi.
Yeah.
So that everybody should know Hindi, but in practice, that's not the case.
Actually, in India, there are so many languages in several states. So if you go one state to another state, the language changes.
Changes.
That is the very difficult issue.
So which state are you from?
I belong to Telangana, right?
The near of Sri Lanka.
I'm curious.
The central part.
So in Bangla, that is from Kolkata and Bangladesh. Kolkata is for India.
And it's again different language.
Yeah.
So what was the name?
Yeah, you type Hyderabad, Hyderabad.
The same one.
Second.
Okay. So you are from Hyderabad.
Yes. So this part.
And what about the alphabet? Because I see this alphabet.
Yeah, so that
What
the
is
second line shows that is in
Yes.
my
right.
language.
This is your language.
Yeah. For example, Priyanka doesn't understand.
She doesn't understand that. But are these also all the same? Or is it changing?
My husband,
Yeah, it is
It's
changing
there
like
at this
immediately
moment.
after that.
Okay.
If you zoom out, so you see those are like independent states. No?
Yes.
Those are like different states.
Different.
It's like the United States, right?
Yeah.
Federal country. Federation.
Okay.
It's always,
Like government,
it's always
but-
changed because of,
Yeah.
you know, there is Kolkata, yeah, there is the Bangla word. That is the
Okay.
Bangla, Kolkata. And Bangladesh, there is also Bangla.
Right.
Kolkata belongs to India and Bangladesh is separate from India.
Right.
But language are same,
Language is Bangla.
Bangla, same language.
In India, we have 29 states,
Right.
but not 29 languages, of course. And like there are like more ups and downs.
Yes.
But the official language is Hindi.
Right.
But
And Priyanka, where are you from?
I'm from Haryana.
Let's see, where is that? How do you spell that?
H-A-R,
H-A-I?
R, H-A-R,
H-A-R.
Y-A.
The first one.
First one, Haryana.
yeah, Punjabi, Kali.
Punjabi from
Then you, yeah, but the borders
Region of India.
speaks Punjabi also.
also.
It's a huge challenge for the government, right? All these languages.
Yes.
So this is the, so you are close to New Delhi.
Yes.
Okay. Are you from Punjab?
No, it is on the border of Punjab.
Right,
Border of
Border of
Punjab.
Haryana and Punjab.
right.
Punjab, they have Punjabi as a language. So they speak only Punjabi there.
How many TV channels you have? Around 500?
I don't
Okay, interesting. Okay.
38 degrees.
38 degrees.
38.
Certainly.
Yeah,
Okay.
my husband is there in that hard.
Hyderabad.
Yeah,
Your husband is in Hyderabad now.
at this moment.
At this moment.
Uh-huh. 38 degrees.
Yeah,
That is temperature
That's
you're
normal.
talking, yeah. So 44 is the maximum, 44. That is, this is March, April, and May is the top,
The hottest.
the hottest.
May.
May.
Is it?
Okay.
And during, because it is near to the equator, so that reflection is so hot. But at the same time, like, we also have different seasons.
That's good. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of winter, right?
Winter is 25.
20.
Yeah, 20.
25, you're right.
Oh my God.
I'm working with the Indian guy, and he said, "Dad, how cold is there?" It's like, "It's 7 degrees here. I cannot get out of the bed." I'm like, "It's minus 70 here." Man."
but the houses are not constructed in that way.
Yes.
Which months are
Winter time.
when you have which months?
Which months? November, December, January.
Actually, in India there are several states, but some cold area was also near about the hills,
Yeah.
like Himachal or Kashmir, Punjab,
India has
Shimla.
like we have
always good.
hottest places, we have coldest places, and we have places where every day it rains,
Yes,
and like all kind of places.
it's huge country.
And huge country.
Thanks for the update about the temperatures. I'm jealous. Spring will come here as well sometime.
Next
One
year.
particular weather state.
India is really beautiful. It's lots of color, lots of nature, lots of culture.
Lots of
Mix up
festivals.
with- Yes,
Lot of
lots of festivals.
Actually, just
If you
today
go-
is a festival
Of colors.
of
Today
colors.
the festival
Of
of
colors,
colors.
yes.
Can you type Holi just?
What I write?
Holi. H-O-L-I.
H-O-L.
Okay. Holy,
Holi, yes.
Yeah. Can you go the image? Kuvaus. Kuvaus.
What?
The second one.
Yeah.
This one.
So this is how people will be today.
oh my God.
Wow.
That is the color of India. It's really beautiful.
Is this in all India or is it,
This festival is in whole India.
when is it?
Also in India, also in
Today.
Bangladesh.
Today?
Today, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Surprisingly, it is today.
Today, Holi is not celebrated only in India, also in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Okay. Happy Holi.
We can also celebrate this festival.
But this is the celebrated all over the India.
Yes.
You know, that's the good thing about having international students here.
Yes.
We see different colors. Very nice. So these are actually taken, a couple of hours before and 1 day, 2 days before. So these are real pictures from recent, these last ones. Like this is the real festival picture, I think. 16 hours before has been taken. Very nice. Well, we are a bit. Can you survive if we finish this?
Are you looking at me?
I don't know. I was meeting all of you. So here I'll be quick. We see the list of the appendix 2, list of the persons interviewed. Usually in this, if you put it as a table, either here in the appendix or in the data collection section, you could add here. So there is the name of the person, there is the company that the person and the title of that person in that company, and then the date of the interview. You can also add how long the interview was. So the length of the interview. And here we see, indeed, she's telling us about the themes that she has, how she has designed the interview questions. She is telling us that the topics varied, but they consisted of the 5 themes. And if we look at these themes, we can see that they are actually coming from her research questions and her theoretical framework. So the last one, innovation gaps according to the gap model, that's coming from the theoretical framework. The 5 questions that we see here, we can see that they are exactly matching the research questions. She had lots of research questions, 1 main, and was it 5 or 4 sub-questions. So these are actually matching with the research questions. So these are the themes that she has included into the interview questions. So lengths of the interviews varied from 22 minutes to 11 minutes, to 1 hour and 11 minutes. And the interviews were carried out in Finnish, Finnish being the native language of all the interviewees and the researcher herself. So she's explaining, you know, what language the interviews were and why they were in that. And then she comes to tell us about the data analysis. And she is telling here about content analysis. That's what she has used for her data analysis as the technique, as the method. And she's also explaining different types of content analysis. So there is the content-based, theory-based, and theory assistant, and she has used the theory assistant approach in her data analysis. Then we have a nice figure on the next page, how she has implemented the content analysis. So there is the figure that tells us the process of the analysis. So this is a nice figure. She tells us about, you know, that she has transcribed the data. Data was recorded and transcribed. Total of 9 hours of recorded audio and nearly 100 pages of transcribed text. Now, when you are doing it, remember, I'll tell it also next week, don't do all the interviews and then start analyzing. Always do one interview, immediately analyze that data. Because after your analysis, you may get some new ideas that you may want to change some of your research questions to get further insights about some areas. So always data collection and analysis goes hand in hand in qualitative research. Interview analysis, interview analysis, interview analysis. That will also help you to know when you should finish the interview. So if you have made already 4 interviews and your third and the fourth interview is, you know, there isn't anything new coming from your 4th interview, that means that you don't need to do a 5th interview. That's also going, sometimes students ask, how many interviews I should do? Well, you will know as you analyze each interview, if you are not getting anything new, that's the time to stop. Here she presents a table about how she has analyzed a sample, the data. She is telling us here that she has used Excel, and I will show you next week how to use Excel for analyzing the qualitative data. There are some nice tables showing about the analysis, and then finally we have the verification of findings, and this is indeed a long, I would say almost three pages telling about all these different validity, reliability concepts. So based on the literature, she's telling us about, you know, what should be done. Yes, nice. But what I miss here in this section is that what she has actually done to achieve validity and reliability. So that is the missing part. And also, you will notice that, okay, in this chapter, there will be like suggestions based on the literature. Okay, in collecting the data, do this, do that. That's good to bring into this chapter, but also I would like to know what you did. So present here what you did to make sure that the findings are reliable and valid. and support that with the literature. I did this because, as let's say here, Simon suggests, blah, blah, blah. Tell us what you did and why you did it with the help of the literature. That's important. So it's now 10:30. Shall we have our 15 minutes break? So 10:45, let's be back to start again.